Welcome to the deep dive. We're looking at a really significant moment now with the passing of Pope Francis.
Indeed, a major moment for the church and the world.
And given his recent health challenges, this has sort of been on the radar for many Vatican observers, hasn't it?
Yes, sadly, it's something people who follow the Vatican closely were anticipating might happen.
It almost brings to mind, that movie Conclave, obviously dramatized, but it captures some of that intrigue around papal elections.
It does tap into that mystique, yeah.
Yeah,
But reality is often, well, different.
exactly. So today we want to try and cut through the fiction, really understand the actual process of electing a new pope. What are the key factors for, 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide?
It's a huge responsibility, and the process itself is, well, quite something. Centuries of tradition involved.
It really is unique, isn't it? This isn't just filling a role, it's steeped in history. Huge significance.
Absolutely. A pivotal moment every time it happens.
Okay, let's get right into it then. The conclave itself. Who are the people actually making this massive decision?
Right. So the responsibility falls to a pretty specific group, the cardinals. But not all of them.
Okay.
It's the cardinals who are under 80 years old. Right now, that's roughly 130 individuals. They're all summoned to Rome specifically for this.
Under 80. Is there a particular reason for that age limit?
Well, the thinking is that cardinals under 80 are likely to have the, let's say, the vitality and perspective needed for choosing a leader for the coming years.
Mhm.
It's a demanding job at the papacy.
Makes sense. And that limit itself, is it ancient?
Actually, no, it's a more recent change, relatively speaking. It reflects how the demands on the Pope have grown in modern times.
Interesting. Okay, so these cardinals, about 130 of them, they arrive in Rome. And then things get really secretive, right? I've read about this strict oath.
Oh, absolutely. An oath of absolute secrecy, and breaking it carries the penalty of excommunication. It's taken very, very seriously.
Excommunication, wow. So they're literally locked in. The word conclave means locked with a key, doesn't it?
It does, yes. They are sealed inside a specific area of the Vatican. And importantly, no outside contact. Phones, laptops, any electronic devices are confiscated.
Total information blackout. Why such intense secrecy? What's the real purpose behind locking everything down so tightly?
Well, the core idea is to shield the cardinals completely from any external pressures or influences.
Ah, okay.
The goal is to create this sacred space where they can deliberate and vote with total freedom, focusing only on what they believe is best for the church, guided by the Holy Spirit, without worrying about politics or public opinion.
So it's about protecting the integrity of the vote itself.
Precisely. Taking away phones, securing the whole area, it reinforces that isolation. History has shown, times when outside powers did try to meddle in papal elections. These rules are there to prevent that now.
Right, creating an insulated space for genuine discernment, as you say. Okay, so inside the secret space, how does the voting actually work? It's not like campaigning and public debates, is it?
Not at all. It's all done by secret ballot.
Yeah.
Very formal, very solemn.
And it happens in the Sistine Chapel.
Yes, right there under Michelangelo's frescoes. Imagine that setting for such a decision. The Last Judgment looking down on you.
Incredible. So, secret ballot. Does anyone know who voted for whom?
No, the ballots are anonymous. That's another layer to protect the cardinals' freedom of conscience. They can vote according to their beliefs without any fear of, repercussions later.
And how often do they vote?
They can hold it to 4 rounds of voting each day. Typically, it's 2 in the morning and then 2 in the afternoon.
4 rounds a day. Until what?
Until one candidate receives a 2/3 majority. That's the magic number needed for election.
2/3? That's a pretty high bar to clear, isn't it?
It is. It really emphasizes the need for a strong consensus behind the new pope, not just a simple majority.
So what happens if, after a round of voting, no one gets that 2/3?
That's when the ballots are burned. And this leads to those famous smoke signals everyone watches for.
Ah, the smoke. Right, black smoke memes.
Black smoke means no decision yet. They actually add specific chemicals to the burning ballots to make sure the smoke comes out clearly black.
And a white smoke.
White smoke, of course, signals success. A new pope has been elected. Then the bells of St. Peter's ring out, too.
Now, I remember hearing something about the smoke not always being clear. There was an issue last time, wasn't there? Some confusion over gray smoke.
That's right. In 2013, when Pope Francis was elected, there was a moment of ambiguity because the smoke initially looked grayish, caused quite a stir in the square.
Huh, I bet. So how did they fix that?
Well, now, to avoid any doubt, they also ring the largest bell of St. Peter's Basilica at the same time the white smoke appears. A clear signal.
Good thinking. Ancient tradition meets a bit of modern problem solving.
Exactly.
Okay, so between these intense voting sessions in the Sistine Chapel, where do the cardinals actually stay? And what happens then? Is that when the politicking happens?
They stay in a dedicated residence within the Vatican, the Domus Sanctae Marthae. And yes, while they're not voting, there's certainly a lot of discussion.
So is it like lobbying, trying to get votes?
It's a bit more nuanced than that. Openly campaigning for yourself, like vote for me,
Mm-hmm.
is considered completely unacceptable. Bad form.
Right.
But inevitably, cardinals will talk amongst themselves. They'll discuss the needs of the church, the qualities needed in the next pope, and yes, they will advocate for candidates they believe are suitable. It's sometimes called horse trading, but it's more like quiet conversations, building support, trying to understand different viewpoints.
So your allies might speak up for you, but you can't really promote yourself.
Exactly. It's about discerning the consensus of the group, finding common ground. It's persuasion and discussion rather than overt campaigning.
That makes sense. A subtle but important distinction. Now, who is actually eligible to be elected? Does it absolutely have to be one of those cardinals in the room?
Technically, according to church law, the requirement is simply that the elected person must be male and Catholic. So theoretically could be any baptized Catholic man.
Any man,
Right.
really. So not necessarily a priest or bishop.
Technically, yes. However,
There's a but, isn't there?
there's a big but. Practically speaking, 4 centuries, since 1389. In fact, the cardinals have always elected one of their own.
Ah, okay. Since the 14th century. Why is that?
Well, it just makes practical sense. The cardinals are the ones most deeply involved in the church's governance. They know the issues, they know each other. They're considered the most suitable pool of candidates. So
Mhm.
while the law is broad, tradition points very strongly to the next pope being a cardinal.
Got it. So once they reach that 2/3 majority, someone accepts, then comes that big public moment, right? The appearance on the balcony.
Yes, the habemus papam, we have a pope announcement. But before that, there's a very private, very poignant moment.
Oh, what's that?
The newly elected pope is taken to a small room just off the Sistine Chapel, known as the Room of Tears.
The Room of Tears. Why that name?
It's said to be because many newly elected popes are overcome with emotion at that moment, the weight of the responsibility they've just accepted. It's a place to compose himself before facing the world.
Wow. A very human moment amidst all the ceremony. And I heard they have robes ready.
They do. In that room, 3 sets of white papal vestments are waiting, small, medium, and large.
Just to make sure they have something that fits.
Exactly. A practical detail for that first appearance on the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica overlooking the square.
Okay, let's talk timing. We know the conclave rules say it should start 15 to 20 days after the papacy becomes vacant. So a little over 2 weeks from now. But how long could it actually last?
That's the big unknown. Historically, conclaves have varied wildly. There was one in the 13th century that dragged on for almost 3 years.
3 years? Good grief.
Yes. Led to some changes in the rules, understandably. But in recent history, they've tended to be much quicker, often just 2, 3, maybe 4 days. Pope Francis was elected on the 2nd day, after 5 ballots.
So a few days is the modern norm. Any reason to think this one might be different?
Well, some observers feel there isn't one single obvious frontrunner this time around. If the cardinals are more divided or need more time for discussion and consensus building, it could potentially take a bit longer than the last few. But honestly, it's impossible to predict with any certainty.
Fair enough. Now, you mentioned the electors of the cardinals under 80. A huge point that keeps coming up is that Pope Francis appointed a very large percentage of them, something like 80%.
That's right, a significant majority of the cardinal electors were elevated by Pope Francis himself.
Does that give us a strong hint about where things might go? Does it mean they'll likely choose someone in his mold?
It certainly suggests a potential for alignment. You'd assume cardinals chosen by Francis might share at least some aspects of his vision for the church, his focus on mercy, outreach, the peripheries. So it's reasonable to think they could influence the direction.
But it's not a guarantee.
Definitely not a guarantee. Each cardinal votes according to his own conscience. Even those appointed by the same pope can have very different perspectives on the specific challenges facing the church and the best way forward. They aren't just picking a person, they're choosing the future direction, and they take that incredibly seriously. It's about discerning God's will, in their view, not just fulfilling the last pope's legacy.
That discernment process is key. Okay, let's zoom out a bit and look at the broader context. Pope Francis himself. He was unique, wasn't he? The first pope from the global south.
Absolutely. First from Latin America, first Jesuit pope. That background clearly shaped his papacy, bringing issues like migration, poverty, environmental justice right to the center stage. Concerns very relevant to the global south.
And how did that play out in his relationships with, say, U.S. presidents? They seemed quite varied. His relationship with President Trump, for instance.
That was often described as, well, somewhat antagonistic, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, strained seems fair.
Mainly due to very different stances on things like migration, building walls versus building bridges, and maybe differing views on human dignity in certain contexts. Even if there might have been potential common ground on other issues, those points of friction were quite public.
And compared to President Obama,
That relationship was generally seen as much warmer, very warm actually, which is interesting because they had a fundamental disagreement on abortion. Obama being pro-choice, Francis strongly pro-life.
right. So how did they find common ground?
They aligned significantly on other major global issues. Climate change was a big one, with Francis's encyclical Laudato Si's, and also migration again. Those were priorities for both leaders, allowing for a strong working relationship despite the abortion difference.
It shows that relationships aren't always defined by a single issue. Then came President Biden.
Ah, yes, the irony there. A devout, practicing Catholic president who was also pro-choice.
That must have created a complex dynamic.
It did. It certainly caused tension with some parts of the U.S. Catholic hierarchy. But reports suggest his personal relationship and working relationship with Pope Francis were actually quite strong.
Why was that, do you think?
Again, shared views on other fronts, things like international cooperation, climate action, support for the poor. And you saw that symbolism, didn't you? President Biden often had a photo of himself with Pope Francis visible during major speeches, like the State of the Union.
I do remember seeing that. It sent a message.
It did. It highlighted how they could maintain a connection despite the deep disagreement on abortion, focusing on other areas of mutual concern.
So looking ahead now to the next pope and future U.S. Vatican relations, do you think abortion will remain the absolute top defining issue, or could things shift?
That's a really fascinating question, especially with the legal landscape around abortion having changed so much in the U.S.
Right.
post-Dobbs. It's possible, certainly, that while abortion will always be a critical issue for the Church, the focus of the U.S. Vatican dialogue might broaden. Perhaps other issues where there's more potential alignment could come more to the fore.
Like what?
Well, things that were central for Pope Francis: migration, climate change, economic justice, the dignity of the poor. Depending on the priorities of the next administration in the U.S. and the priorities of the new pope, we might see more emphasis on those areas of potential collaboration.
So it really depends heavily on who the cardinals elect.
Absolutely. The personality, the background, the key concerns of the next pope will be hugely influential in setting the tone and the agenda for the Church's engagement with the world, including the U.S.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive on the conclave, it's just striking, isn't it? This blend of ancient tradition, intense secrecy, solemn ritual, but also, undeniable human dynamics.
It really is. Centuries of history shaping a process that involves prayer, discernment, but also discussion, persuasion, and ultimately a vote with profound global consequences.
And the choice they make in these coming days or weeks, it's not just internal church business. It genuinely affects global affairs, diplomacy, the conversation around major world issues.
Without a doubt. The Pope is a unique global figure, and the direction the Catholic Church takes under new leadership will ripple outwards.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder. How might the specific background, the experiences, the core priorities of whoever is elected Pope actually shift the way the Catholic Church engages with all these critical global challenges we've touched on? Climate, migration, poverty, peace. It's something worth watching closely.
A crucial question indeed. The identity of the next Pope matters enormously, well beyond the walls of the Vatican.
Well, thank you for walking us through all that really fascinating stuff.
My pleasure. It's certainly a compelling process to understand.